just before we go on, if it's all right, Andrew, I was just so struck by this quote from J.I. Packer during the week, and over the last few years, I've just become so much more conscious of how difficult this day can be for people within our church family, within our community, and there's times I feel like how to know how to even respond and react to days like today in some ways, and I got the opportunity this week to spend an hour or two with our church family, with a part of the Bride of Christ across Asia, with friends from Bangladesh and Nepal and India, and we just had a great time sort of talking around this revelation of God as Father. And there's some things that trigger within people that make this difficult. But J.I. Packer has this quote, and I just find it so profound. It is one of those places that I go back to regularly over and over again. When he says you sum up the whole of New Testament religion if you describe it as the knowledge of God as one's Holy Father. And so if you want to judge how well a person understands Christianity, find out how much he makes of the thought of being God's child and having God as his Father. If this is not the thought that prompts and controls his worship and prayers and his whole outlook on life, it means that he does not understand Christianity very well at all. And the quote goes on, our understanding of Christianity cannot be better than our grasp of adoption. And I don't share that quote just as an isolated quote because it's Father's Day. I think that is part that will maybe be one of the threads that we might pull out of our conversation here this morning when it comes to stuff around identity, which Amy took us through 3 weeks ago. So just to make sure that we all remember what we're doing, I and we are increasingly passionate about changing what are Sunday mornings constantly feeling like a monologue, but trying to change it into a dialogue, and so that's why these mornings are really important for me. They're challenging in many ways because you're giving up some sort of control. You don't have your 30-minute presentation to run off.
Who knows what I might say?
I know exactly. That is the thing. An extra loss of control with you, Andrew, in that fancy shirt. So let's go back. It mightn't be as neat and tidy as going through. So Amy took us through this idea of resilience 3 weeks ago, and then 2 weeks ago, Glenn Mitchell from Tear Fund talked about walking with the poor and the marginalised, and we'll probably touch on that. And then last week I talked about the forgiving way of God. So those are the 3 weeks that we've had, and so now we just have this opportunity to pause, hear what it is that we have been hearing and hopefully learning together. So Andrew, thank you so much for doing this, for helping us as we continue to work this all out together as family. So do you want to just start? Do you want to just kick off what you're...
Yeah.
We think we'll have some thoughts around where Amy took us 3 weeks ago. So why don't you start, and we'll see where we go from there.
Okay. In no particular order, I suppose, as well. The funny thing, whenever you asked me to speak or to talk to you today, is I didn't actually remember anything from the last couple of weeks. Okay. And I don't know if anyone else is like that, but I definitely, you have to sometimes like really sit and think, what was that actually about? And then, it does start coming back to you. And especially sometimes it's more like the sentiment than the detail. Yeah. But that idea of resilience, that idea of the difficulties that we face in our journey, are I can't remember who the quote was from. You mentioned it, how God might be more interested in the process than in the end result.
Not me.
And Amy. But you told me that yesterday. So yeah, I think that's really powerful, and I was actually reminded of that, strangely enough, through reading something work related earlier in the week. There was an interview that Tim Cook from Apple gave, and talking about the success of the company, and he said that quite often people think that success is the opposite of failure. It's a very common adage people have, but in their perspective, success is actually the culmination of many failures. And I kind of thought, that is quite like our lives and our journeys. It's we tend to learn more from our failures. And in the times where we feel like we're failing, or where things are going badly, that is when we do rely on the Lord more, and can sometimes strengthen our faith and help us go on into the next challenge. And a lot of what Amy talked about, that and that journey with Hannah, and all the things that she went through, to finally get to that answer to prayer at the end, and then. And that had strengthened her faith, so that when Samuel was old enough, she'd give him back to the Lord, like she said she would. So I think, I think that was really powerful.
Yeah, and so just so you all remember, there was that question Amy asked that I still remember, and so I'm like you. I don't remember, because we're all the same. Like by Wednesday, if our way of learning is simply by listening to somebody speak for 30 minutes, we'll only retain about 3 or 4 or 5% of it by the time it gets to Wednesday.
Yeah.
So, but this is one thing that I'd love us to continue to hold on to, is this question: what if God is more interested in the journey? What if He is more interested in the process than the end result?
Yeah, I don't even think it's a question. I think it's an absolute. It wouldn't make sense to me if it was the end result. That's not what we're asked to do. It's not what He calls us for. Maybe some people see salvation and getting into heaven, that's the end result, but there's all that time in the middle, and that's, you can't just be saved and then do nothing for the rest of your life.
So I think I agree with you, but I think why it's important for us is that then how we engage with our community and how we engage with our family, can we say the same thing about us?
Yeah.
What would it look like if we were more interested in the journey and the process than we were about getting them to say a prayer or sign a card, or you know what I mean? What would like walking with people look like if we truly were more focused on the process, walking through the pain and the questions and the doubts and the failures? What if we were more interested in that than we were about the end result? It might change something in our discipleship and in our evangelism and all of that.
Yeah, if your end goals, are to have the Instagram family or the perfect church, you can certainly do that. But what do you lose on the way?
So the idea of resilience, again, what Amy talked about, was that part of resilience is actually focusing on the journey so much more than the outcome.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't want to prod too much, but we do maybe want to talk about that idea that, as Amy brought us through the story of Hannah, she talked about there are seasons that we have where pain is part of the journey. Is there anything that you've thought in and around that?
I definitely agree with it. When she said it, I thought back to different periods in my life where they were very difficult, where I wouldn't want to go back to them, but I now can find a form of joy, in looking at how I was helped through it, and how, and how God helped me through it, and how my family and friends helped me through it, and how maybe strengthened our relationship or strengthened us as a family. Those things are invaluable. It was definitely a difficult time, but it made things better.
Very good. So on that, just continue to stay around that thought for a moment. If I can just share this story really quickly that I shared with you out there, and if there's anything more you want to add to it, please do. But I was telling Andrew out in the room there that I read a story about Blaise Pascal this week, and he's like a 17th century mathematician, philosopher. I don't know what else he was. I think he was a theologian, actually.
It's a very cool name as well.
Blaise Pascal, isn't
Yeah.
it? Nobody did forget that.
No.
People still remember that name as we finish.
There'll be a test.
17th century philosopher, theologian. That's what will you be asked, tested on. But he had this encounter with God, And so the book that I've been reading at the minute is called Hunting for Magic Eels. It's a really fun title. But it's speaking about these encounters that people had with God, and so Blaise Pascal had this 2-hour encounter where he just experienced what he described as the fire of God, and it was so specific. It was from 10:30 to 12:30 on a particular date in the early 1700s, and what he acknowledged, and what the author of the book that I'm reading acknowledged, is that there's experiences and encounters, beautiful experiences, beautiful revelations that we have of the goodness of God, of the Father heart of God, of just like radical encounters. But he acknowledged that they are transitory, that they're short-lived. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do with that? And so the writer of this book talked about how these sacred truths that are revealed, the things that we experience, how do we carry them forward? How do we hold on to these sacred truths in those moments that need to be carried forward? Because the truth is that there will be seasons where God will go quiet. There will be seasons where it feels like he is absent. And during those seasons, how do we create the discipline of memory? And so what Blaise Pascal had done, he had written down this whole encounter, what he felt was being unveiled, what was being revealed to him, and he wrote it all down, handwritten, and he had it stitched to his jacket. And so in those seasons of pain, in those seasons where everything else had gone quiet, he held close to the encounter. He held really tightly to the revelation. The discipline of memory became so important to him that he was able to be resilient. He was able to hold on to who he was and who God was in seasons of pain and quietness and seeming absence. And there's something about that I just felt was really important for me. And as we were thinking about resilience and resilience in identity, that we can so often be waiting for the next big moment, the next big encounter. But actually, what would it be like to engage our memory, to hold on to this discipline of memory that will allow us to remain resilient in those seasons of pain? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Discipline of memory. That's I remember that.
Well, it was only 15, 20 minutes ago, Andrew.
I'm talking about like 15, 30 seconds ago. Yeah, no, actually, discipline of memory is... so a lot of people don't know this, and I don't talk about it very much, and I probably should talk about it more, but as an adult, I was diagnosed as having ADHD, and some of you may be saying, that explains a lot right now. And to me, personally, that explains a lot. It doesn't excuse a lot of things, but it does explain a lot of things. So discipline and memory is actually something that I really struggle with. And ironically, I've forgotten who said it or where I heard it or read it, but about a month ago, somebody somewhere mentioned about how the different theologians have been considering that just looking at behaviours of people in the Bible, that there's a thought that Peter, the disciple, the apostle Peter, may have had some form of ADHD just based on his behaviour. And I think it was somebody, I know it was somebody at Teo Associates, was talking about this. And they were saying just the things that Peter did, how he could be one moment, literally riding the waves, walking into Jesus, and then say, oh, what was that? And then falls. Or Jesus tells everyone to be calm, but he decides he's going to take out his sword and go for the soldier. And it's very, very typical ADHD behaviours there. But I did find that very interesting. And it's what were we talking about? We're joking. So yes, being able to remember is very important, and I like that. But he's written it in he's carrying it with him everywhere. It was making me think about how there's these experiences that we have in our lives that are just so traumatic, maybe is the right word, like things that are for good or for bad. Like you think about experiences where people came face to face with God in the Bible, how Moses' face was shining, and there's different experiences people had. Some people dropped dead. The experience of coming face to face with God was such a majestic and overwhelming thing. And in our lives, we have experiences, whether that is an experience with God or just experiences in life, for good or for bad. Sometimes they become so, they're just so emotionally traumatic that we can't even explain them. And a lot of books have been written. People, they turn to art, to music. They write stories, they write films, to try and explain this, because it is like a picture paints 1,000 words. And even like allegorical works like Pilgrim's Progress or the Narnia books, that's a writer has tried to explain this really complicated idea in a way that we can relate to. And actually, and I was like, who else? Tolkien is another writer and contemporary of C.S. Lewis. So he wrote The Lord of the Rings, and whereas C.S. Lewis was writing the Narnia books, about Christianity and faith and belief, Tolkien wrote those books about war, and so some of the experiences that he had in the First World War. And so, again, so you're seeing two different types of allegory. There's one allegory about faith and hope and love, and then there's another allegory about like the trauma of war, about how, yes, people can battle through. And spoilers for anyone that hasn't read or watched Lord of the Rings yet. But as Frodo takes the ring, and then destroys it at the end, he's never the same again, because that trauma has stayed with him. And that was Tolkien talking about how, just that experience through the 3 books, 3 movies, if that's the way you're inclined, has changed him, and he'll never be the same again, and he can never go back to the life that he had before. And although that was something, the idea that was behind was about trauma, it's still a very powerful thought about how, our experiences do change us. We're not the same people at the end. We can't, as much as we might like to, go backwards. Can I talk more about Lord of the Rings? Is that all right? All right.
Frodo had the ring. You have the room, as you. You have the room, Andrew. Take work away.
And with great power comes great respect. No, that's not Lord of the Rings. So without being too nerdy about Lord of the Rings here, so at one point Frodo goes back home after he's destroyed the ring. Again, spoilers. And he just can't connect with people anymore. He can't go back to that simple life. He has had this new revelation of how the world works, and again, for good or for bad. And he decides that then he can't live there anymore, and he has to, in the books they talk about sail off west to the land of the elves. But you can't go home again. And that's definitely something I think in our journeys, in our Christian walks, that we definitely experience. Because it's not just the process; it's how it changes us and what we learn from it. And we might long for those simpler days, those early days of faith, where you just felt this mighty working. Sometimes it's just you just long for younger days, whenever you didn't feel like everything hurt when you stood up. But so maybe it's age as well as the journey. But you do feel like going back to those days would be great. Like, do you remember all the things we did? Like youth groups or mission trips, and all the great experiences we had. And if you tried to do that again now, it just wouldn't work, because you're a different person. But that molding of you as a person is God's intention, because then you can do greater things. You're always learning from that.
Very good. That's deep and rich. But in saying that, there's still, I know you've thought a wee bit about identity. And so, there is the seasons of the pain, there is the experiences that do ultimately change us. But there still feels there's something around identity that does still ground us in some way. That still, like, there is still something to root us, that we can't, so that we're not like through every season of pain or like we're still being grounded in something.
Yes.
And I think identity is one of those.
Yeah. I mean, I think it helps form what our identity is. Because I know, like, you know, even who we think of ourselves, or what we think of ourselves, changes through life. I know last week you talked about forgiveness, and whenever you talked about that, I was actually like already writing down, you know, should we forgive ourselves? And then you said it, because I actually think that's something, because it's not only, you know, how we see others and treat others, but actually how do we see and treat ourselves? And you know, I think to be authentic, to be your authentic self, you do have to know who you are. You have to know what you believe. You have to be okay with asking questions, having doubts, having, you know, bad spells, having good spells, and realize that all of that is what makes you. You know, so I think in terms of identity, being self-aware is probably the most important thing.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
I don't know.
I think it's, just because I think it's good. Like, just I think self-awareness is like underappreciated value. But why I'm still standing around this idea of being like resilient, because Amy used the language concerning Hannah, resilient in her identity, and for me that's part of my experience. My experiences when it comes to the things of God or encountering God are very rarely like moments where like lying on the floor or something has happened to me physically. It's more like a revelation. And so the key thing for me has been revelation about my identity and an assurance of God's love.
Yeah.
So it's the same, and I love that that's how even Jesus begins his ministry, with this unveiling, with this recognizing and moving into the world with an assurance of the Father's approval and love. Because his encounter at his baptism, the Father, before he'd done anything, spoke over Jesus, "This is my Son, who I love, and in him I am well pleased." And that becomes the thing that, even though I have experiences of pain and failure, whenever I'm rooted in that the Father approves me, that he is for me, as we've sang, and not against me, that goes a long way to developing resilience in the seasons of pain.
Well, that revelation of, you know, just like discovering something new from something you're reading, I definitely find that. I was reading, I said to you earlier about this, 2 Timothy. So Paul's writing to Timothy. It's kind of the end of the second letter, and I definitely read that in a new way this week as a father than I probably would have before I had children, because I definitely was reading it, seeing Paul as a father figure to Timothy, and I know that came up in the video as well. But I'm going to read it real quick. So this is 2 Timothy, starting at, I think it's chapter 4, starting second or third verse. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. And well, I mean, that sounds very like these days, doesn't it? And will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. So it really does feel like a goodbye. Like, it does feel like, you know, Paul more so than me standing up and feeling pain, is kind of just exhausted. You know, he definitely had a lot harder life than I have at that point in his life, and you know, he's passing that wisdom on to Timothy. It's like, you know, the last thing he's sharing with him, and I definitely seen that and thought about legacy and about the legacy that we leave for our children. You know, what sort of example are we setting? Yep. Which is a very different thing than I would have thought about, you know, 11, 12 years ago. You know, Lila and I joke about how before we had Tamar, you know, I was even uncomfortable with being called dad. It's like, I don't want to be called dad. It's like, just call me Andrew. That's really weird. Why would you want that? that's not what happened. And for anyone who does that, that's fine too. But yeah, that was just like, that was where I was, and so my journey as a father has, because I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I don't know.
Do you know now?
No,
Pass.
no. I've just gotten better at pretending. Just bluff with confidence. That's that's the secret.
Better at pretending. That's a good line. Now.
But yeah, it's like, even knowing how. So like Tamara, she's obviously the eldest. So she's the practice one, and then the other two are perfect. I had to get her back, because whenever last night she wanted me to prep, she did say that Neil's going to ask you who you are. And then she was trying to prep Neil on this earlier as well. She said, he's going to ask you who you are and tell me a bit about yourself, and you have to tell him that you've got one beautiful child and two bad ones.
Tamar, what other? I forget all the prep you give me. It was really helpful. How are we getting on? All right? Is there any questions that you're thinking about that would be helpful to ask now? No? Tamar was really helpful, to the point where she's going to do the next one, interviewing, aren't you? Yeah, so if you have anything more around that, you can come back to it, but I want to move quickly. We'll take another few minutes here. Conscious of time all of a sudden. But Glenn brought us through Luke chapter 4. I suppose he was speaking about the work that Tear Fund we're doing across the world, and mentioned about walking with the poor and walking with the marginalised, asking that big question, what is the church for? And so I loved how he closed it out by actually, as we begin to answer that question, the role of the church is to address issues of injustice. That is a true sign of the kingdom. It's a beautiful sign of the kingdom. And so one of the things that I was reflecting on, even after it asked you to do this, was even just to speak a wee bit and remind everybody your job.
Transponsor.
Is that what you do? What your job is, I think, is a beautiful sign of the kingdom. Mm-hmm. So it's addressing imbalance. It's addressing injustices within the media, within accessibility, and all of that. And so, if you remind people just a wee bit of what you do, but how that is for you, like a sign of the kingdom, how that is revealing the Father's heart of love to everyone.
Yeah. So what I do is, officially the title is accessibility consultant.
There you go.
So what I do is I work with different clients who make websites and apps and really anything that you would have on a computer. I try to steer them in a direction that will mean that their product will work for people with disabilities. And that's trying to cater for all disabilities. So for some things that's easier than others, and for some companies and some clients that's easier than others. But it is a constant battle, because to do things properly costs money. I often equate what I do. It's a bit like being maybe like a building inspector, or something like that, where you can build a house, without getting planning permission, or without even having an architect design plans. It might fall down. Maybe you decided to build it on the sand. It might not. But if you get caught, you're probably going to be in trouble, because there are building regulations for a reason, to try and make structures safe and keep people safe. And so I'm kind of like that, but for the internet. Because people, believe it or not, people can actually be harmed from a bad website. Really easy example to understand is how having something flashing like an animation on your site can trigger epilepsy. And just because your designer thought, oh, it looked cool to have something flashing, doesn't mean you should do it. If someone stuck their head in the fire, would you do it? I actually used that as an example with a designer earlier in the week, because they wanted to do something that looked really good that everyone else did. And I had to say, no, just hold on. Just because it's a trend doesn't mean you need to do it. And so a lot of what I do is it's part investigation. You're doing a lot of kind of like digging to try and find what problems might occur. Try to put myself in the shoes of somebody with a disability. Maybe somebody who's blind or somebody with limited mobility. how would they use a computer, how would they use their phone to browse the web, and what sort of things might get in the way, and then go back to people and say, okay, this is what you need to fix, this is what you need to change. So there's definitely like a teaching element of it as well. And all of that you're trying to balance with trying to be pragmatic, because you don't want to say to the company, and it's going to cost you another £10,000, which in some cases it will, but you have to try and spin it in a way that that they're going to, well, that they can't, legally some of them can't say no, but they still try.
Yes, what I've appreciated about it is how you're like restoring the value and the dignity of everyone, like,
Yeah.
and I think that's so important.
It's definitely. I mean, it's. I don't feel. I don't immediately feel like I'm doing something, for the kingdom. But I know you've used that language before, and when I stop and think about it, it is. You are helping people. To me, I'm just doing my job.
Yeah. But I think because I think wherever we are, whenever you're addressing issues of injustice, and you're trying to redress the imbalance of power and bias or whatever it looks like, I think that's exactly what Jesus was all about, and he spent so much of his time doing that. And so, because your role is in that, like we all can do that. We're just highlighting that role that you do, but we all have a responsibility and ability to be able to do that.
You don't get a lot of opportunity to kind of share the gospel per se in what I'm doing, but you definitely get to share morality.
Yeah.
Because that is one of the other things, as well as the legal reason to do some of this stuff that the companies have to do. I do get the opportunity to say, but what if it was your parents? What if it was you? What if it was your children? Yeah. Think about the people that your choices are affecting, and try to just get people to think outside of themselves again, which I think is a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about as well. That's a big thing in how we treat others, is just look outside of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the big thing for you, the takeaway. I think that was the first thing you mentioned whenever I'd asked you, is there a particular direction you want to take this morning, and the treatment of others was the big thing.
Yeah, because I think everything else informs that, because it's your journey, your identity, how you show forgiveness, and how you treat other people. It's all part of that. It's all part of yourself. And I think probably the truest reflection of who we are as a person is probably how we treat other people. At least the most visible thing. And I know some people, people maybe who aren't self-aware. I don't know. I'm pointing myself. I don't know how self-aware I really am. But people who aren't self-aware, may try to put on a front by helping other people. But probably should be starting looking at themselves first of all. So I think it's definitely I'm not saying help yourself first and then help other people, but you definitely have to be aware of what you're doing. And I definitely think that as you probably mature as a person and mature in your faith, if you're not helping other people, then you have some serious questions to ask yourself. Maybe a lot of people are running away from those questions. Yeah. But that's such a clear thing right throughout Scripture. Even that bit where, again, reading from Timothy, where he's sending them out, and so this is actually I had notes on this verse in my Bible, and I looked up who said it, because there was a quote that I'd written down, and it was Neil from a few years ago. So talking about Timothy and Paul, what Neil said, thank you Neil, it was, don't leave feeling that you've played it safe when you have the opportunity for something greater instead. So don't leave feeling that you've played it safe when you have the opportunity to do something greater. Do the work, fulfill your ministry. Do you even remember saying that?
Doesn't sound like me at all.
It's very, it's very powerful. And then there was another reference to look for where Jesus is reading, and he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." And then he rolled up the scroll and sat down. And then my note says, "Mic drop," which I don't know if that was in Neil's original sermon or not. But it's definitely one of those, Jesus mic drop moments where it's just very simple. It's, God sent him to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering the sight to the blind, set at liberty those who are oppressed, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. Like, that's it. Yeah. It's as simple as that.
You sure the mic drop wasn't a note you left for yourself to actually do this morning?
No mic. Paul says no mic drops.
Okay. Yeah, and so whenever it comes to that treatment of others, I think, again, for me, one of those encounters, one of those moments of clear unveiling revelation was when so much of what John says in his first letter, 1 John, and I think it's chapter 3 or chapter 4, where he says, if you cannot love those that you can see, don't even try to say that you love a God that you can't. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh man, John, that, like, so if you're worried about, like, not that you were, but about how clear cut that is about our treatment of others, well then take it up with John. That is for me, that's just so powerful, so incredible. It's one of those measuring sticks that I probably go back to and ask those really deep questions, really provoking questions. So really quickly, I'll just finish off with this quote from Anne Lamott that I shared with you. And if you have anything more you want to say about this forgiveness or self-forgiveness that I ended with last week. Because Anne Lamott, I was reading her a couple of weeks back, and she was reflecting on this seemingly improbable relationship between brokenness and joy. And she goes on to say, the lesson here is that there is no fix. There is, however, forgiveness. And to forgive yourselves and others constantly is necessary. Mm-hmm. Not only is everyone screwed up, but everyone screws up.
Yeah.
And so the sort of discovering joy is like, sometimes we think that our brokenness and our pain and all of that disqualify us from experiencing joy. But the lesson is that there is no fix, but there is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And to forgive ourselves and others is just this constant necessity.
And I think if you can't forgive yourself, you can't really find joy. I mean, that's probably a reason for a lot of the problems people have. And I know I personally find it really hard to forgive myself for things. And I almost tell, don't know about you, but I almost tell my children, to apologise to each other, for whatever they've done. But yet I'll still hold myself to a standard in my head of, where I can't forgive myself for stuff that I have done or stuff that I've said in the past. So we definitely have to be able to forgive ourselves. And forgive others, on our journey. Yeah, because we make mistakes all the time.
I think that's a good self-aware piece, because you're acknowledging that, and there's probably something in me acknowledging that, but I'm aware that I am probably not qualified to take that conversation any further than just acknowledging it.
Yeah, no, I don't think I am either.
Anything else? Anything else that's in your head that you just have to get out before we finish here?
There's some fly.
It wasn't in your head, it was on it there for a while. Stuck to that gel.
That's not gel. That's just
Brill cream.
No, my hair just goes like that. It's through sheer willpower alone.
Wow.
No, it's cream.
I'm coveting my neighbour's hair here.
I definitely thought that, first thing whenever you'd asked me to do this, after I thought, what was it about? The last few weeks was, again, those are some really difficult topics to start talking about, identity and charity and forgiveness. I mean, they're big concepts. Yeah. They definitely are. Yeah.
And the most important thing for me is that I never want us to think that we're taking these three topics and whoever's sitting up here is providing the answers. Yeah. It's not that. It's just to sort of let people listen in a conversation so that we can all be asking different questions together. So, and for me, I'm in some ways like you. Like I'm not criticizing or judging you because you've forgotten what I've preached about. As much as that might pain me, that nothing I said was of any profundity that you remembered it by Wednesday. But I know for me, I hold on to it, having conversations. I'll hold on to learning in dialogue so much better than I will in monologue.
Absolutely.
And so for me, that's why we're trying to do this, and maybe not doing it wonderfully, but we're giving it a go, and failures and pain and discovery and all of that is part of the journey.
That's it. Just feel a lot, not lead to success.
Brilliant. There we go. So, Father, we thank you for this time, and thank you for that reminder that that in spite of our weaknesses and failures, that you have committed yourself to being with us and to being for us and to walking with us. And we thank you for that. We thank you for this reminder today of who we are in you. Nothing changes that. We are divine image bearers. Those that we come in contact with today are made in your image. Every person in this room and every person that we encounter throughout this day and this week are worth you giving your life for, Jesus. And so we agree with you on that, about every person that we come into contact with this week. And Jesus, we thank you for your unfailing love. We thank you that because of that reminder of who we are and who you are, we can be resilient when it's difficult. We can be resilient in the painful days, in the seasons of quietness and absence. We thank you for that. We thank you for this opportunity that we have as carriers of the kingdom to be able to stand with those who are poor and oppressed and are marginalized and isolated. We have the chance to demonstrate the kingdom to people like that. We thank you for Andrew. Thank you for how he does that in his job. We pray that you would challenge us all in how we can do that in the places and the spaces that we find ourselves in. And God, we just continue to lean on you. And we thank you for that prayer that you've taught us to pray, Father, and we reflect on that again in this moment. Father, would you forgive us our mistakes as we forgive those who have made mistakes against us, and forgive us our sins, forgive as we forgive those who have sinned against us. And so yeah, God, just increase your self-awareness with some of this stuff that we've talked about. God, help us to continue to discover, to ask questions, to be able to open ourselves toward you. Search me, God, know me. If there's any anxious, hidden thoughts, God, just bring them out into the open. And we hold them and we live them all out together. So bless the rest of our day. Thank you for it. And we will rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.